Hi everyone, I am Nikki from Twilio Startups. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm really excited to discuss building your startup's customer roadmap and what that means. And as mentioned, I'm a former founder, so I totally get it, advisor, program manager, and now I'm a startup evangelist at Twilio. So for those of you who are not familiar with Twilio, Twilio is a cloud communications platform that allows you to kind of build any customer experience through APIs. And today I'm super excited, as mentioned, to share some new research and insights, things that will help you build your customer engagement roadmap, including our best practices, and just really thinking through strategic communications channels to help you build meaningful connections with your customers. So let's get started. So in this session, we'll start by going over exactly what I mean when I say customer engagement. Then we'll check out some studies that Twilio has done recently and analyze the data. That will lead us into the learnings and best practices. So you can kind of think of those as you're creating your own individual strategy. And then finally, I think it's always helpful to look at a case study. So we'll check one out of an early stage company and what they did with their communication strategy. And then we'll discuss finally some experiments that you can start running today to get started. So let's start with the big question. What is customer engagement? The way that we define customer engagement is the emotional connection between you and your company. So these sentiments, unsurprisingly, strongly influence buying decisions. And so customers that feel loyalty towards a brand, towards a company, tend to spend more money, of course, and they tend to support brands that they feel connected to. So how can you build those connections? First, let's just take a quick look at this customer engagement lifecycle that I have here. You can see there's obviously many different ways that you'll be interacting with your customers as startup founders. And when you look at the lifecycle, you usually start with marketing. So how can you raise awareness and pique people's interest? Then you move to sales. So how can you make your product valuable to your customer? Of course, you need to get to delivery. So how is it received? How are they getting your product or service? And then importantly, support. How can you best help your customers navigate any challenges? And inevitably, there are challenges. So basically, what you want to take away from this is that at each stage of this life cycle, you as the founder have the ability to create a communications experience, and you get to choose which channels you use. So why is it important to have a solid customer engagement strategy as a startup founder? Some of you might be building your MVPs, you might just have an idea, but why should you be thinking about this from the beginning? And what I think is in business, like in life, it's important to always have empathy for others. So you have the opportunity to build this customer engagement roadmap from the ground up with your startup. And at Twilio, we have a set of values called the Twilio Magic. And one of my favorite Twilio values is this one, wear the customer's shoes. And so what this means to me is that in this time of uncertainty, especially, and if you take away one thing from this presentation, I hope that it's this, is that you should always be, spending time to deeply understand your customers and really solving problems from their perspective. And really the goal of your customer engagement strategy is to earn trust through every interaction. So let's explore some learnings and best practices to help you get started. Today, I'll highlight some relevant points from our recent 2020 Global Messaging Engagement Report and State of the Customer Engagement Report for 2021. So this is some brand new stuff, and I'll provide links at the end as well. So to get started, Forrester Research, I just thought this was interesting, predicts that companies will reorganize to ensure customer experience and customer insights collaboration. So what does this mean for you as a startup founder? So by creating a better customer experience and communicating strategically with your audience, you'll be able to glean not just what your customers are doing, but actually have actionable insights that can create a more comprehensive picture of what's happening. And so this will basically enable you and your team to tell a more compelling story about your customer, improve what you can predict about your customers, and basically engage stakeholders at every level. And the idea is to create these meaningful and relevant insights that can inspire action and drive change. And so as startup founders, you're a builder. You're definitely a builder. And what your challenge and more importantly, your opportunity, I would say is that these interactions are across many different channels and they generate a flood of customer data and you need to think about how you can make that actionable in order to best serve your customers. So, why should you plan your customer engagement strategy from the inception of your business? I think, one of the biggest takeaways for founders of startups about, the current state of customer engagement is that engagement is good. We all need to engage with our customers, of course, but insight is even better. And so what we found is actually 90% of companies surveyed reported an increased customer insights as a result of customer engagement. So what we know is that, every interaction now has moved online. We're online right now. And it's really happened at the speed of light. And so you have to think of new ways to engage customers and your communities. And digital engagement isn't, something that's just keeping organizations afloat now. It's really everything. So what the report really showed was that everything has changed, of course, and more importantly, businesses have no intention of going back. So the way that you can start building a successful customer engagement roadmap is by running experiments to reach your customers on the right channel at the right time. You'll probably hear me say that a couple of times today. There is no one customer engagement roadmap that works for every startup. I wish I could just say, go do X, Y, Z. But what I hope you can get from this presentation is the ideas and to spark some interest into how you can create, your own product roadmap, customer engagement roadmap using these tools, keeping in mind things like urgency and opt-ins and content that we'll talk about more. So the most important thing is to know your audience, and I'm sure you've all heard that before. No country or region or demographic is the same, and really the best way to do this is to embrace experimentation. So according to our engagement report, there are some important things that you can keep in mind. And first, let's talk a bit about email. So email is probably a channel that we're all using. Usually it's one of the first channels that startups use to talk to their customers. And so what are the main turnoffs for email? So for those surveyed, the main email turnoffs that we found were irrelevance, grammar and spelling errors, getting communications from an unknown brand. And so really the key thing here to take away is that you want to be a recognized sender. It's super key to make sure that, if you're offering emails or discounts, that you are having people opt in, and based on, different preferences, knowing the regions and knowing your demographics. So here's another great chart from our engagement report that I think is really interesting for startup founders. And so what's unique about this report is that this report, as I mentioned, was about email, but it also includes a bit about SMS, which I'm sure some of you are considering using text messaging your customers. I know I get text messages from businesses all the time. And so rather than just reporting on open rates and click-through rates, we actually expanded our research and wanted to see, why recipients engage with different messages and what elements and what text you can include that would make it more or less valuable for your recipients. So this year, again, we aim to answer a few questions. How do people interact with emails? What compels people to open them? And then how can you use these findings? And so let's start talking about which channels could be right for your startup. So according to our 2020 Global Messaging Report, email, again, is the most popular communications channel globally, followed by SMS. However, if you look at the report, it actually says in Japan, Germany, and the UK, they prefer social media ads slightly over mobile messaging ads. So it's important, again, to see what resonates with your target audience in your region. And you can always find research like this to help you out. So similarly, frequency preferences also vary by country. So in the US, we found that recipients are more likely to be okay with receiving emails every day. I'm usually fine with that. While recipients in Germany, Japan, France, and the UK prefer emails once a week. So again, think about what communications you're currently sending or planning to send, and try to map them out to meet the preferences of your unique audience. We'll just take a quick look here, a deeper look into SMS text messaging, because I think it's super relevant right now. Recipients around the world actually prefer to receive SMS or MMS messages once a week or once a month, so less often than email usually. And text marketing, something to keep in mind, is still relatively new. I work at Twilio. I tend to sign up for all text marketing, but I know a lot of people aren't yet comfortable with it. So, what you want to do is make sure your audience is opting in, comfortable with the kinds of message you're sending, giving them options. It's important that, it doesn't come off as invasion of personal space, especially with text messaging. And you want to consider these limitations when you're building your strategy from the beginning so that you don't overstep any boundaries. And remember, what you want to do is build that trust. And the way that you can do that is by always providing relevant information on their preferred channel. So how do you know what their preferred channel is? Of course, it seems obvious, you should ask. But you can also start by creating your own engagement strategy based on known preferences. So as a startup founder, put yourself in the customer's shoes and think about the experience that you want them to have. What's the impact if they don't receive a message in 5 minutes? You can also think about what if they need to search for a receipt next week. Thinking about your use cases along these lines of message urgency versus archival messages will help you determine best fit. So I really like this chart. I recommend it to startups all the time. Start thinking about, what is urgent, things like verifications, delivery notifications. I just got one right now. And those things should be sent via text because they're immediate. And then think through archival things like transactional emails, receipts, password resets that you want to make sure that get into their inbox or that need to be referenced later. So here's another great resource, I think, for thinking about different kinds of notifications for your customers. On this cheat sheet, you can see, unsurprisingly, urgent messages have the highest open rates. SMS has about a 98% open rate. But what's really key here is to remember not all of your communications are urgent. I know when I was a startup founder, I thought everything I was saying was extremely important and everyone needs to know it right away. But remember, you should also think about utilizing email. It has a lower open rate, but you can include more content and you can easily reference it later. So you want to consider things like, does this need to be a two-way conversation, in which case maybe SMS is better because you can reply quickly. And what channels is your audience already using? You also want to think about opt-in settings and necessary compliance for your region, which we'll get into. So speaking of compliance, very important. How can you try to avoid some of the issues in the first place and optimize the effectiveness of your engagements? Clearly, you just need to follow best practices. And critically, it might sound obvious, but what I always tell startup founders is don't send until you are sure you have the correct permissions to contact your list. So if you're not sure, ask again. It can't hurt. The bottom line is that, if you don't have the right permissions, don't send the message until you get it. The next thing that you want to do is check your list. So as a startup that's scaling, it's super tempting to think that a longer list is better. I know I did. I was like, oh, I have X number on my email list. It's so great and it's growing. But what you really want to make sure you have is quality. So you want to make sure you clean your list regularly. You want to remove inactive users. I know it's hard. You want to check the spelling of emails. You want to validate phone numbers if possible. And then finally, the other best practice to remember is that you control the frequency. So every business varies. Some customer journeys definitely require more communications than others. But my advice is to always start with less, and you can add more as needed, because how often you send can be just as important as what you send. So in summary, I just wanted to highlight kind of the ultimate takeaways from these reports that you can apply to your strategy today. The study found that you can always have fun and experiment with subject lines and emoji if your target audience is a younger demographic, which I think is cool. According to the study, you want to have fun subject lines and occasional emoji that works well for Gen Z. You want to optimize your emails for mobile. So, over 20% of respondents said they exclusively use their phones to check email. I know personally, I'm always checking my email on my phone, maybe too much. And finally, and this is a fun finding that I thought is really great for startup founders, is do promote discounts, and especially deep discounts. The study actually found discounts of 40% or more are perceived as more legitimate and are least likely to be ignored. So just something fun to keep in mind. As for the don'ts, don't make promises in your emails or texts that you can't fulfill. They found, obviously, in the US, Americans were very upset when they found out that an email's content or destination link didn't match the promise made in the subject line or the image or the copy of the email. And finally, don't send SMS messages with the exact same content as a text or email. Personalization is always key, and your links should be branded and consistent with your other campaigns. But you want to make sure that you have, different content for your different channels that's more relevant to your audience. So now that we've gone over a little bit about SMS and email, learnings and best practices, I'd love for you to start thinking about trying it yourself. So think of your customers on a journey and start to map out where you see the whole experience and all of the different touch points to see how they work together to form one customer experience that's holistic. So overall, a mix of urgent messages delivered by a channel like SMS and archival emails leads to a better customer engagement experience. So for this simple example, let's take a delivery app. I'm sure we've all had some food delivered recently. I know I had some yesterday. And basically this was the journey. So the customer places an order, they get an email so they can reference it later, super helpful. When did I order it? What did I order? But when the rider leaves and the restaurant is able to contact the customer to get order updates, that really enhances the customer experience because those can be via text because those are super urgent when you're hungry. And then of course there's your receipt. So you have it in your email, you can find it later, maybe you need to expense it. So looking at this very simple example, start to think about how you can best plan your customer interactions to optimize for your startup. So far, we've kind of focused on these fundamental channels of SMS and email, which is where many startup founders begin. But I do think it's important, especially now, that we talk a little bit about video as a channel and how it's enhancing all of our connections, especially during the pandemic and beyond. Right now, we are on a video at a virtual event. So you all know the importance of this. And unsurprisingly, of all the digital channels, video saw the biggest boost in 2020 and became the default replacement for every kind of in-person interaction that we used to have. We all use video now, and I think we can agree that it's been great for connecting in a socially distanced world. But what the report shows, and what I think is important to remember as a startup founder, is that it's not always a one-to-one replacement for in-person interaction. So just because it can be used for something doesn't mean it should be or it's the best way. So really start to think about your video experiences and how you can make them better for your customers so that you're really enhancing the experience and not just trying to create a quick replacement. So again, how important was video last year and how should you think about it as a startup founder? Well, 78% of respondents in our State of Customer Engagement report said they now use video and 98% that reported that video accelerated more than any other channel. This trend is echoed by a 350% increase in video usage on Twilio in 2020. And so basically the takeaway here is, are you leveraging video? Should you be leveraging video? And what ideas can you think of that, video might help for your startup? So in all, again, it's really about a mix of channels like SMS, email, video, WhatsApp, and more that can help you craft a successful customer engagement experience. And that will really help you differentiate your startup and create, a memorable experience for your customers. So again, all this research is great in theory, but I think it's always helpful to see a real world example. So let's look at how one startup used an omni-channel approach to communications and later added video to enhance the experience of their customers. And today we'll talk a bit about Luma Health. So Luma Health launched in 2015, raised a Series B in 2019. They're a San Francisco-based startup, and basically they're founded on the principle that everybody deserves great access to healthcare and that patients should easily connect with their providers in a mobile-first, modern way. I think we can all agree to that. This has become obviously more acute this year when we need to adapt to different COVID procedures. And so basically what Luma Health provides is a customizable suite of tools that helps medical professionals better provide care through appointment reminders, waitlist options, easier billing practices, post-appointment feedback, two-way texting, chatbots, and things like that. So what I think is really interesting about this example is that it's actually a B2B2C solution. So it kind of gives you a glimpse into, when something like Luma Health adds a new channel, they're actually adding a new channel for all their businesses and then all their customers. So it just keeps multiplying. So going back to that chart that I showed you earlier with urgency versus archival, You can see clearly health notifications and appointment reminders and cancellations would be best served by SMS. With Luma Health, they put the power to choose channels in the hands of their customers. So even though, it might make sense to do it via SMS, some people might prefer email. So what you really want to do is give people the ability to turn channels on, turn channels off, and pick and choose what works best for them. Customers could choose to receive a variety of communications. They could do voice, email, SMS, and really that allowed them to book appointments, receive confirmations, prepare for appointments, get reminders, and really do everything that they need to lead up to the actual appointment easily and on the right channel at the right time. So the impact of this omni-channel approach and customizing channels based on preferences was super clear. Basically, Luma Health saw a reduction of 79% in no-shows and an average NPS of 89 for their customers, and an increased return on investment of over 6 times, depending on the appointment value for the medical professionals that were using it. And more than creating tools for patients to engage with doctors' offices, the pandemic really forced Luma Health to think about their offerings and then rethink about their offerings, especially in relation to telehealth. So prior to COVID-19, the natural next step was, the patient got all these great reminders and then they get to their appointment. They have everything pre-filled out. They've done all the, necessary paperwork. But with COVID, they really had to change all that. And in response, Luma Health was able to quickly implement a telehealth functionality. And so to further tackle kind of all of the challenges brought about by the pandemic, Luma Health was able to develop a zero contact waiting room solution and help minimize in-person interactions at physical locations by, using text and voice. So that's just really part of the story though. So that's everything kind of leading up to the appointment. More than offering communications channels, Luma was then able to augment the product itself by becoming an end-to-end solution for patient communications and engagement. So the pandemic spurred the company to expand their actual delivery of care via telehealth by implementing a HIPAA-compliant video and chat feature. So not only could they get the appointment, get the reminders, check in, they can even have their appointment through the app and either do video or chat. So in all, basically, Luma Health's offerings to specialty clinics and health centers allowed them all of these different tools that allowed them to engage with their customers on the right channel at the right time and really cover every part of the patient's journey. So what can you take away from Luma Health that you can start building today? Because I'm sure everyone wants to get started. And I think the key here is to try some experiments. So let's talk a bit more about that. Creating your customer engagement journey is different for every business, as I mentioned. And so what you'll need to do is, just start somewhere and pick an experiment. I recommend grabbing some pizza, some paper, some co-founders, and thinking about another element of the Twilio magic, which I try to do every day, and that's write it down. So first, ask yourself, how are you currently engaging with customers? And then, how are you using email? Do you have an email newsletter? Is it good for promotions? Can you also maybe think about using it for thought leadership or curating different content? Then go back to your idea of what are the preferred channels? So which communications are you sending that are super urgent that need to get there via text? Which ones, might be better served via email? And then insights. So how are you collecting customer feedback? Can you do that via SMS? I always think it's really fun to send an SMS survey. Should you just schedule one-on-one meetings if you are, running a beta test? And pro tip here, I think you can always offer some kind of discount or gift card for participating in feedback sessions. And then finally, is there anything you can do to build deeper relationships with your customers? Usually I recommend thinking about video for this. So for example, can you organize virtual office hours or can you do product demos via video? Basically, the idea is to start with a prototype of your customer engagement strategy. Keep it really simple, as simple as you can, but have a vision for where you want it to go. So here's the tool that I created to help startup founders kind of map all of this out and write it down. You can see here, I have this customer engagement canvas. And you can really start by filling in your current strategy there on the left. What communications are you using already? Messaging, voice, video. Then start writing down, what are all the emails? You might be surprised by how many different, transactional emails you're sending. And then finally think about, how do these different things you're already sending fit on that urgent versus archival chart? And do you have some mismatches there? And can you, change some things around? And then I would start to think about, what are the experiments that you can run? And are there any new communications channels, hopefully that I mentioned today, that sparked some interest that you want to consider? So maybe you want to set up a simple IVR phone tree so you can route people via voice. Maybe you want to set up a chat bot. Maybe you want to do a new email, that kind of thing. The key with the experiments is to set realistic and measurable goals. So you can actually see, how successful these experiments are. And basically with this canvas, the possibilities are endless. So you can start to plan out the future of customer engagement for your startup just by writing a few simple things down now. So really quick, you may have noticed the lovely pizza box graphic that was on the engagement canvas. Well, this is the real pizza box. This is the first official product roadmap for Twilio, and it's written on the back of a pizza box in 2007. As you can see, it's framed. And if you look really closely at it, I thought this is really neat. You can see the third thing on there is update the welcome email text. So what this says to me is get started today. It doesn't have to be fancy, could be on a pizza box, but start writing down how are you going to be engaging with customers and making your plan for the future. So that's all I have for today. I hope you feel inspired to build your own customer engagement roadmap for your startup, and I would love to hear about it. Love to hear how you're building the future of communications. Again, I'm Nikki Rubin, startup evangelist at Twilio. You can always email me at nrubin@twilio.com. And with that, I'm happy to move to a Q&A, and here is the link to a blog post that actually has the customer engagement canvas if you want to try it out, and the links to all of the research that I mentioned today. Finally, before I take some questions, as we like to say at Twilio, we can't wait to see what you build. So keep me updated. Best of luck, and thank you to Startup Grind for having me today.
Thank you, Nikki. That was, as always, super informative. So really appreciate you taking the time and walking through this. We do have just a couple questions in the Q&A. So I want to remind everybody watching right now, please post your questions if you're having any issues with your current customer roadmap, anything for Nikki, now's your time. So please go ahead and do so. Nikki, the first question that we have are, what are the best ways to understand the customer needs and deliver exactly what they need?
Sure. I think the best way is to ask. When I was a startup founder, I would just organize small focus groups, keep it really simple, maybe order some pizza, and just really talk to the customers, and was always kind of surprised by what they said, because I think when you're a startup founder, you're so in the product and you understand it so well. And then if you just take the time to do quick 5-10 minute phone calls with customers, you can really get their insights. So I would say always ask.
That's a really good point. Any recommendations on how to ask? So if you're not sure yet what vehicle you're using, whether that be text, email, how do you go about asking?
Sure. So what I recommend is starting to build your list. And so either doing that through, events or partnerships, and just starting to get people that are, excited about what you're doing, especially if you're very early stage. And then actually something that I did is kind of switching with another startup founder. So find another startup founder in your community. It's also a great way to meet other startup founders. And see if maybe they can do some customer interviews for you and you can do some customer interviews for them, because that way it kind of removes you a little bit. Sometimes it's a little hard for people to, give constructive feedback when they know that you're the founder of the company. So it's just kind of a cool way to build community and also kind of remove yourself one back from the interview. And, just email people and, give them the option, at the bottom of your newsletter or whatever you're doing, or if you're doing an event, to, email you and just get started that way.
Awesome. Thank you. By the way, is anybody else craving pizza after this? That was hilarious seeing Twilio's first
That's
customer
awesome.
roadmap on a pizza box in the
I love
reference. I'm definitely going to have to grab it for lunch today. Next question we have is, how do you prioritize the engagement touch points? When you're starting from scratch, it can be quite overwhelming.
Sure. So I would say, start with what is simplest. Usually, and not always, but usually it's email. So how can you use email? Email is a great tool for reaching, a large group of people, and start there and see how that works. And then once you have that built up, then you can send another email that says like, hey, are you interested in getting texts? Like put your number here, and then you can kind of gauge interest there. Or you might find that people, respond and say like, actually, like I'm on WhatsApp, and then you find that trend, and that's where you want to reach your audience. But I would say, just layer it on. So start with something like email that's really simple, and then try and experiment with something like SMS. And if it's, not the right channel, then try another one.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question we have is, how do B2B roadmaps differ from B2C roadmaps?
Sure. So I get this a lot. A lot of people think like, oh, SMS, email, you're talking about B2C. Especially obviously with B2C, there's going to be a lot of customers and a lot of customer touch points. But really, I think it's kind of the same thing. It's empathy. So even if you're a B2C company and you have 1 million users, or a B2B company and you have 5 major clients, you want them to feel special. You want them to reach them on the right channel at the right time. So it actually, to me, I think it doesn't really change the strategy that much. It's really about having empathy, talking to your customers, and making sure that you're listening to them and building that trust. That being said, I think on the B2C side, there's a little bit more room usually for experimentation. So if you are a B2C company, there's kind of a bit more you can do in terms of like thought leadership via email, or sending surveys via text and stuff like that.
Have you found cadence to be different when it's B2B versus B2C? So say, I think it was, once a week for an email. Have you found that to be different for the two avenues?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think they broke it down that way in the study, but just, from what I see and anecdotally, I actually think it really depends more on the product. So if you're doing something, say that's like in security, and being in touch all the time is key. Say it's like security, but it's B2B. You'll have a lot of touch points and you'll have a lot of message urgency. And so, just thinking about, your business and how important these communications are and when they get them. Similarly, if you're B2C with deliveries, again, I think I mentioned this, I love getting the text message alerts personally. That's like, your delivery is almost here. Your delivery is out for delivery. Your delivery is at your door. So thinking about, how you can kind of optimize for those situations where you need more messaging, but then, not overwhelm people with too much marketing so that they don't, read those super important things.
Yeah, Uber Eats definitely has me locked in right now between the updates as it's coming, but then also just, I think it's once a day at this point. Like, hey, are you hungry for some lunch? Here's a $5 off code. And
exactly. Yeah.
They've pressured me, that's for sure. Next question from Guillermo is, what would you recommend for a go-to-market strategy regarding SMS solutions? How to get people to start using your solution and develop a niche market?
I feel like I would need a little bit more context about what the company actually is. But I would say, when thinking about SMS, what you really want to think about is, creating that experience for your customers, again, for things that are urgent. So, especially in the beginning, not, inundating them with marketing materials via SMS until that's something that they, opt into or are interested in. Another case study that I've done before was this company called Pet Desk. And what they did is basically created a digital system for veterinarians and pet care providers for pet parents. And they found, that actually they were sending all of these text messages out being like, your appointment is in, 10 minutes or whatever. And people were responding back and they didn't have it set up for two-way messaging. So, trying something and then seeing how your audience reacts and then building based on that learning.
That's It's really interesting. And also, I hope that they got their company figured out after not responding to all those people.
No, they did. They totally did. They instituted two-way messaging, and it was a big success.
There you go.
Yeah.
Last question we have, it's pretty broad. Do you have tips on how to create good content?
Sure. So I would say my number one tip I give to all startup founders on creating good content is think about curating more than creating. So as a startup founder, you're probably wearing a million different hats. I personally love writing. I mean, I mentioned that value, write it down. But keeping up with a newsletter or a blog when you're building a product and doing sales and support and everything else is really hard. So think about what you can curate. So is that like a top 10 list? Is that, these are the books you should be reading? How can you really position yourself as a thought leader by curating content and also writing content when you have time?
Great, thank you.
Sure.
When you were speaking about the video piece, can you speak just a little bit more about how to leverage video? So is that really conducting meetings via video, including video in your email marketing, or sending a video link on text messages? What do you think the best way to incorporate video is?
Sure. So yeah, when I was talking about that video, you could obviously tell it's become, everything now since we're on video. For that, it's really about, do you need a custom solution where you are interfacing with your customers or your customers interface with each other? And so basically what you can do with Twilio is build video rooms. And so if that's something that's super important to your product or something that you want to try out, it's just a really great way of, creating interactions that feel really personal, hopefully, and meaningful. And a great way to get to know your customers better or for them to create community. A lot of times when I think about video, I want it to be, something that's relatively short. I think, people's attention spans is a little slow, and something that they can access at all times. And so being able to hop on with someone on a support video might be important if you have like a physical product and you need to demo it. Or if you're, building a solution that you thought, might be via voice or via chat, and now everything is video. So really thinking about your product and how video can enhance what you're doing, and being able to create those kind of like custom video rooms so that, you don't have to leave the experience of, what you've already built in order to have the experience of, speaking to someone face to face.
Yeah, I think that's great. And obviously we're at the benefit of using video, and it's not the best replacement, but it is the only one right now for a lot of people. So leveraging video is a really good point. Just a friendly reminder, if anybody has final questions, post them in the Q&A. But for now, Nikki, I'll leave you with this one from Javier. He says, what are you reading these days?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. I have a kindergartner, so I'm reading a lot of books with him. That's kind of my major reading list was getting ready for kindergarten recently.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Javier, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, Nikki, thank you so much for your time. As always, great presentation, so insightful. We love having you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and can't wait to see what you build. Thanks. Have a great day.